So this last section of our summer programme, and in no way is it chronologically the last section, because it's really running through the entire programme, is around connecting with other people and creating moments where we're encouraging the students to build relationship, to communicate, to talk, to ask questions, to give feedback, to listen, build their listening skills, their turn-taking skills. And in all of the activities, and Hannah's just put up here behind us just some of the different activities that we've done over the programme. And everything from making up your motivational poster, making the bunting. In all of this, if you're doing this work in a collective way with small groups, it's really important maybe at the beginning of your programme to make sure you establish some of the ground rules around communication, and that you create opportunities for real clarity for the young person around how they will communicate and connect with other people. And certainly some of the As I Am tools, like these, the simple bracelet where I'm happy to talk, or you turn it around and please leave me alone. And allowing the young person a sense of control over their level of communication. The first time I encountered these stickers was at the As I Am conference a number of years ago, and everyone joining the conference got these stickers, and one of the stickers says I'm happy to talk to anybody. That's the green sticker. The next sticker, which was the orange one, is I'm happy to talk to people I know. So only people who know me or I know I'm happy to speak to. And the red one was I don't want to talk right now. And it was really interesting myself when I saw these for the first time. It was like a light bulb moment. I had this real sense of immediate control, because sometimes those very new environments I can find a bit challenging. And straight away I went for the red one and stuck that on my jacket. And I felt like I became invisible and really safe really quickly. I could sit at tables, I could engage, I could listen, but I knew nobody would talk to me, which meant I knew I wouldn't be put on the spot. And having that sense of ownership and control over my environment can be really, really helpful, to the point I still have them stuck on my iPad. And I still point every now and again to people. I'm using the red one right now. So creating maybe your own version of that, maybe using the As I Am armbands, these are really powerful, and in school they can be transformational for a young person. Because sometimes the young person, I know we've used them, a young person might have the red side turned all day long, and that's absolutely fine. The key is that they are able to access the curriculum, they have a sense of control over their own communication. It doesn't mean that they don't feel safe or that they're alone. It's our assumption sometimes that means that they are alone or that they're lonely, as opposed to the fact that I know no one's going to come at me with questions or I'm going to be asked to speak means that I can hear, I can listen, I can process, I can engage at a level that's appropriate for me.
And there's no goal to get it to the green.
No.
Like it's not, as you were saying, it's not a bad thing that it's on the red, and you're not trying to get them to a point where they'll change it to the green. It's about them having control over how engaged they are in particular aspects of the day.
And that idea of being asked to spontaneously communicate can be enough to really trigger things like school refusal, where a student will not come to school because that sense of being overwhelmed. I know I have students in our school who actively choose that the only way they can engage in their day is for them not to be able to have to communicate, not to be overloaded with questions. They're happy to write answers on a page, but they really don't want to verbalise in a larger group. And creating a safe space for them to be able to do that means they're coming to school every day. And we really actually saw a huge shift in that with online learning. Because it meant that some students could actually access the full class but mute themselves.
Or turn off their camera.
So it meant I could be engaged in the learning, but I had control over how much of me was presented in that moment.
And I remember us having a conversation about that around that time, Billy, where we realised that that concept of school refusal was not learning refusal. It was refusal to come into the building because of the culture, because of those extra demands. It wasn't refusal of learning the curriculum or engaging in the curriculum, and that online learning really proved that.
And it really gave a lot of students, a lot of schools, we saw a much higher level of engagement with students who would have previously been seen to be school refusals or school refusers, where actually they were turning up every single day for every lesson. And it really challenged us as a school to think, how are we going to interact differently? How are we going to maybe use this new learning, this new technology to create appropriate learning spaces so that young people and adolescents can access the curriculum? So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a number of activities. This first activity I'm going to hand over to Anne, and it's looking at using stones or other objects. You know, it could be any other object. It might be something we collected on the nature walk, and Anna's going to tell us some other ways that we might maybe use those tools as well. So over to you, Anne.
Yeah, so it's just some rocks that we got, say from the nature walk, which you could have got, or maybe they just had them in the garden or whatever, and we can connect it up with, there's a few things you could do with them actually, because you can make them into little characters. So like there's one here, like it's a pig, you know, so you could create a whole, you know, number of them, family, friends of the character, the pig or whatever it is. On the back of that then you just have it's just a decorative stone basically, and it's just a design. So it can be basically, it's just taking something maybe that they've got from that nature walk, or from maybe they've had them in their garden at home or whatever, and just actually being creative with it, and that really is what it is. But we could actually create the characters that can be used in stories, and do that one person removed in situations and scenarios as well. So we have 3 stones here, and then there's just another one where again it's just there's some little writing on it, so you could just use a little marker to do that, and you know there's some little love hearts there for friends and stuff like that. So again, it can depend on what you actually want to use it for. And the paints that we're going to use, now I just got acrylic paints, just regular ones you get in any craft shop or discount store, but likewise you could use the just the regular poster paint as well. That will do either. I have some sponge, so depending on what design or textures you want to do. Some paint brushes, thicker ones when we put on the base colour, and then we have smaller ones if you want to do a little bit more detail on it with the black. Again, you might be looking at doing a base colour and then putting the design on it. Now again, you could have, well this is the activity, but the research before this could be where they create the design that they're going to put on the rock, or maybe it's just literally sitting down, taking the paint and seeing what way I want to go with it. And then we just have some craft glue to paint on afterwards, so that means that it won't, the paint should stay on the stone then, that it won't actually wash off. You know, but like, I mean, if you don't have it, you don't have to use it, but if you do have it, it's just a quick, like it's like a varnish basically to put on it. And then we have our pom-poms from earlier activities, and likewise if you know the little googly eyes that you can stick on, you could also use those, particularly if you were going to do the characters. So we've painted on the eyes here, but you could likewise do the sticky on ones, you know. So I suppose really I'm just going to give you, do you want to take a stone? And off you go. And I'll take it. And there's some pots here then as well for the actual paint or whatever colour you want to go with.
And if you were using these in primary, Hannah, would there be any way that you might use them in a slightly different way that might be kind of more effective with the younger students, or would there be any sensory issues that we need to think about?
I think you don't even necessarily need to use stones. Stones are great, obviously, you know, but you can use, it's not just limited to stones. You know, when we were talking about having gone on a nature walk, you know, you can collect leaves and then you can make lots of different leaf characters, and you can make a village of leaf people, and you can create stories out of that. You can use them for that psychodynamic approach as well, where, you know, this is the one step removed piece, and you can do role play with them. You know, you can absolutely do that with the stones too, but a really great way of using these, and we're going to explore a little bit more later, is looking at facial expressions, using different kind of emojis, maybe painting them on the rocks, or and then using that in stories or in activities where we're looking at, well, how would we know if somebody felt this way? Because that is something that many autistic children and young people can struggle with, identifying what facial expressions mean and what different kinds of body language mean, and using kind of really concrete activities like this can really help with that.
And I think that idea of doing the experiential piece around the emojis, I think, is a really nice one. The other thing that you could do is find emojis that you really like online and print them on labels. And then you can cut the labels out and maybe stick those labels to objects. So whether it was stones or whether it was another object, like you could use small pieces of leftover wood. You could just use pieces of card.
And if you have a group of students doing this, they could all do a character as well if you wanted to do it that way, and that it would be an individual piece as well. And these can be gifts as well if there's, they can do it that way. So there's lots of opportunity for them to use a lot of the creativity that we had from the other activities with this as well. And just, it is a bit messy, so you probably do need to make sure that everything is protected around you.
And again, remember, if there's sensory issues around paint or smells of glues or the texture of things like the sponges, allow the students to wear gloves. Maybe if there's a lot of talk in the room going on, because sometimes when we're doing practical activities like this, students can get a little bit louder. One of the things you can do is allow students to wear ear defenders. Again, it creates that a little bit more sense of control over their physical environment to maybe allow them to be a bit more relaxed in the activity. Again, you hear the silence that happens when we're doing an activity like this, because again, part of what it does is it just quietens our thinking a little bit and allows us to focus a little bit more on the activity in hand. And then, as I'm having now, is a little moment of frustration because the things want to stick the way I want them to stick, and I'm feeling like I used the wrong glue.
Yeah. Maybe, no, it should be okay, actually. Yeah, it should be okay.
Just might need a little bit of pressure.
Yeah.
Fine.
Do you want to use a rock?
No, okay. Might actually try the Prit stick. See if that helps me along. Can you guess what I'm making?
Butterfly.
No.
Fraggle Rock.
No.
That's an age thing.
I was just thinking that Fraggle Rock is still not on television.
What's that?
No, what I was trying to make there is a physical representation of the communication bubbles.
Ah, very
So
nice.
if I point the green side out, I'm happy to talk, but if I turn it around and point the red side out, leave me alone. And again, it could have just as easily been painted, but I like the textural impact of the pom-poms because it can be something that the student places their hand on. And the small things that we can do in class, that's why I really like the As I Am armbands. They're really simple ways of communicating with your teacher so that they know what your needs are. And sometimes one of the mistakes that we make is we transfer all of that back onto the teacher and we don't give the young person autonomy to be able to communicate what I need on a moment-to-moment basis in school. Like a movement break is another really, really common one for a lot of young autistic students in school, that need for a movement break, their need to be able to stim, and maybe they might want to stim outside the classroom, and creating a really safe way of them communicating that with their teachers in as public a way as they feel comfortable, because I know certainly in our school we would be very, very clear that on students, it is absolutely the students' right to feel as comfortable to stim in whatever way they need to, in an appropriate way for them, and it would be extraordinarily normalised, and it would really, as appropriately, just not be noticed. But if a student wants to stim privately and they want to take 5 minutes, we have cues to how they communicate that with the SNA or the teacher in the room, and then there is a place already organised for the student to go to if they want to. But again, it's all down for what's appropriate for that young person. But that 5 minutes of a movement break, or that 5 or 10 minutes to go and decompress, or sit in the swing, or use the rolling machine, or sit in the quiet hut, all of those spaces that allow the young person to manage their sensory experience, to allow them to re-regulate, to allow them to go back in to then access to curriculum is hugely important.
So again, you could spend ages, I mean, we're just doing a quick thing there with what we have, but certainly if you were doing this with students, and be it a group or individually, you certainly could have a lot of fun with it. I mean, Hannah, I know you've done flowers. Yeah. So, and I just put an initial on mine, so then that could be a gift. You could be giving that to somebody.
Yeah.
And like Billy, you said what you did. You put a lot of texture in yours. So, like, there's lots of things that we could actually do with them.
You could, if you were going to the beach, you could collect shells and then you could paint them all different colours and put them in a frame, stick them onto like a texture board kind of thing.
Yeah. So, and they could be paperweights, on a desk, or for the students as well. That could be another part for it. So yeah, so it's just different ways of actually using these, and again, the students can be as creative as they'd like.
So again, these are just really simple activities that allow you to either extend. I really like the idea of creating an emoticon family of stones.
Yeah.
And then maybe that the students are using those stones, and like one of the activities we talk in this section about is creating a case study or an example of a scenario. And rather than write scenarios for you, we would really actively encourage you on the programme is to design some scenarios. And one of the best ways to do that is to ask the young person to, again, go the psychodynamic approach, one step removed. Imagine another student in school had an issue around break time, lunchtime, being in class, asking questions. Let's write up what that might look like. Now, for the young person who helps you do that, they're going to draw on their own experience, but they're not talking about themselves necessarily. So that scenario they will help you write. So if I say, well, Hannah, imagine now that we were writing up a scenario that a young person had a challenge at break time that they needed a bit of help with. What kinds of things might be happening at that break time for you, do you think?
I'm thinking perhaps maybe wanting to get involved, maybe wanting to get involved in a game but not knowing how to ask that, not knowing what's appropriate, how do I get involved in the game, maybe not knowing the rules of the game, and then kind of feeling maybe a bit isolated on the art.
So, and by creating the scenario with the young person, they start to make it much more connected to what their maybe worries might be, their personal experience might be, or something that they've seen happening in the yard that they weren't able to navigate or weren't able to guide through. So you could do a number of things. You could take that scenario and maybe use the Edward de Bono's thinking hats to explore that scenario a little bit further and explode it out so you get a little bit more detail. You might then maybe write it up as a narrative, or what works really well is you could do it as a storyboard. And when you storyboard it, you just maybe divide a page into 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 boxes, and you draw little images of what's happening in each box, or you can write in sections. I went out at break time and I noticed a group of people playing a game on the other side of the yard. I stood and I watched those students playing the game thinking that looks like great fun. The third box is, I really wanted to engage, but I didn't know if they would make fun of me if I went over. I was looking around to see if I could understand what the game was about. I couldn't make sense. The next box, I saw the teacher standing near the group, and and I wondered maybe I should go over and ask them for advice. So that you're, by boxing it off, we call that a learning frame. By giving it a frame to chunk it down, it allows the student, or using numerical sequence, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, using that numerical sequence connects into the logical part of your brain, and it allows you to be a little bit less emotional about how you're writing it out. So you build a scenario with the young person, and then you might go back to your 3-2-1 strategies. What 3 actions or experiences might that young person be having? What 2 actions could they do, and what might you have learned from that experience? You could use the thinking hats to explore. Let's look at green hat on that. What could that young person do? What things, and then work through. Well, they could do nothing and ignore them and just sit and watch the game. They could go and ask somebody after the game what that game was about and what the rules were, and come up with a number of scenarios about ways that they might handle that situation. And especially for the autistic young person, working through that social scenario, working through a number of different ways of responding to it, and bringing that event and what if, and then what might happen, and carrying it through so that they create, in reality therapy, we call that your quality world. What does it look like? And the more detail, and what would be happening then, and what would that person be saying, and what else do you think might be happening? The more, if you think about it like colouring in, the more I colour in that image of what's happening with detail, the easier it is for that young person to step into that new situation, especially that autistic young person. And whether you're in a special school setting where you might have much smaller numbers and maybe a bigger variety of need, whether you're in a mainstream setting, whether you're in a special class setting, it's really important that you explore these opportunities to engage with other people. You're absolute right to not engage with other people, but for many young people, they want more engagement, but maybe not as much as another. And how do I find what's appropriate for me? And that's through dialogue, through modelling, through role play, through case study, through scenario work. And the more we make it not about them, but about another. And you can even create a virtual character and allow that virtual character to move through. And that conversation would look, Hannah, wouldn't it, much different with a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old
very much
than
so.
maybe a 15-year-old.
Yeah, when you're talking about detail, you know, the level of detail that you would expect would obviously be very, very different. And, you know, it would understandably, from a 4-year-old's perspective, be more focused on themselves, and they may really struggle with that green hat thinking because it's abstract, you know. And some even older autistic children and young people, they might struggle with that green hat thinking, so there needs to be a lot of support, a lot of scaffolding around that to help with that. And
I think certainly with the thinking hats, the white hat piece can be a lovely piece when you're working with the autistic young person, because it's all detail and fact. And sometimes you will notice they're excellent at noticing so much detail in that situation. They can talk about the physical environment, the ground they're standing on, the walls around them, the colour, the light, the sound, the things that they're listening to and hearing in that moment. And that gives you a real palette to allow you to colour in and explore all the other things that are going on for that young person. So that's a really nice and a really simple activity.
Yeah, and even just going back to the motivational quote, actually, I think we mentioned it yesterday, but like if you had, you know, some of the larger stones here, you could actually write the motivational quote on it, you know, and that could be something that
your desk.
And keep it on your desk, exactly. So lots of things that you can do with it,
So thank you very much, and we will be back now, and we're going to look at another couple of really simple activities around using playing cards.